listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb. I'm sorry ahead of time for any coughing that goes on in this episode. I'm still recovering from sickness in week 2 here of doing that. So, if you're watching post Christmas, post December 25th, I want to wish you a happy Christmas tide. If you're watching during the 12 days of Christmas, which start, day one of the 12 days starts on Christmas and goes for 11 days after that. You may be watching during that time. If you're watching outside of that, then hope you're having a blessed time whenever or wherever you're listening to this. This is a Fallacy of the Week episode, and I've been dealing a lot with Advent, Christmas, nativity type stuff, and I'm going to do that here because we're still in Christmas tide now. And someone had posted a meme recently related to Christmas and the nativity events, and I thought, man, that'd be a good one to handle on the Fallacy of the Week episode. So that's what I'm going to do. If you're watching, I'm going to show this on the screen here, and if you're just listening, then I'm going to explain it too. But here we go. You should be able to see this. Here it is. The meme has little baby Jesus laying in a pile of rocks on a pile of wood. But the text says this. This Christmas, remind your Catholic/Christian family that baby Jesus was born in Palestine. As Mary and Joseph fled a violent government that ordered the killing of babies. All right. Oh man, there are so many fallacies going on here. This Christmas, remind your Catholic Christian family that baby Jesus was born in Palestine. All right, we'll deal with that. As Mary and Joseph fled a violent government, we'll deal with that. That ordered the killing of babies, we'll deal with that. Okay, so let's actually start with the very last thing, the violent government that ordered the killing of babies. Now, the person that posted this, ironically, is an outspoken Planned Parenthood advocate. And so it was actually all throughout the year-round, every year, doing the liberal thing where they're pushing Planned Parenthood and this institution that grows off of murdering babies. So one, I thought, it's a blatant contradiction for that person to have any room to say anything about anybody killing or murdering babies. But there you go. So there's a blatant contradiction. And I think most people left-leaning would be posting something like this, not people center or even right. People with a brain wouldn't post this. All right. So anyways, and by the way, the killing of babies, as I've talked about before on the podcast, and as you can read in The Case for Christ and in other places, it wasn't some huge massacre of thousands of babies, right? That's not how it played out. There maybe was less than half a dozen. Bethlehem was a small town, and the number would have been very, very small. So I'm not minimizing any of those deaths. We don't know if any how many occurred, and none of those should be minimized, but it wasn't a genocide or a massacre, and a government wasn't systematically just going through the world killing babies. Okay, so then you have this issue of Joseph and Mary fleeing a violent government. And this whole thing, by the way, is posted during the time when Israel and Gaza in 2023 are still having an ongoing conflict. And what the person is really attempting to convey with the meme overall is that you have Israel displacing the government, Israel attacking and displacing people in Palestine, right? And they are using that government is using violence against people, forcing them to flee, and they are killing Palestinian babies. And so this is really an attack on the government of Israel. And it's attempting to use this, twist the story of Jesus, Joseph, and Mary to attack the modern nation state Israel. Okay, so there's a ton of problems there. But another thing that's going on here is that we have this whole turning of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus into refugees. And that's really, I want to dial in on that for just a few moments here and think about that, because the other memes that float around that sort of get at this same thing, that modern Christians, wherever they may happen to live, should welcome all refugees because Jesus, Joseph, and Mary were refugees. And when they point back to this, they were fleeing violent persecution under an evil government. And so we can't possibly reject refugees today and at the same time embrace Joseph, Mary, and Jesus during Christmas, because they were refugees too. If you're going to embrace those refugees, then you have to embrace these refugees, which actually is not true because they're two different sets of people. And as I'm going to say in a moment, I don't think Jesus, Joseph, Mary are refugees. Okay, so and that's what I want to focus on. So there's a ambiguity fallacy going on there, an equivocation fallacy, and so I want to talk for a minute just about aspects of what makes a modern refugee. I'm going to talk about, I guess, 6, maybe half a dozen points, and then use those same sort of 6 talking points to think about the lives of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. So, when we think about modern refugees, what we have, you look at places like, countries in Africa where people have had to take on this refugee status. Refugees are typically individuals or families who are forced to leave their home country for good due to persecution, sometimes governmental, sometimes not. Sometimes there's an uprising, and you have a sort of sect, it might be ISIS or something like that, some guerrilla warfare sect rises up and overthrows the government, performs a coup, and then starts persecuting others. So sometimes it's government, sometimes it's like an anti-government militia or something like that. But people have to flee for their lives because of that, with really no hopes of coming back. Okay, and that's important. So you have this forced displacement with no hopes of coming back. The second aspect, when you think about a modern refugee, is like from a legal perspective or a legal framework, right? Refugees today benefit from what we would call international legal frameworks. And one of these, if you look at the 1951 Refugee Convention, right, it defines, actually this defines refugee rights and refugee obligations in host countries even. It defines what is a refugee, right? So you have, this is a very modern convention where you have refugees defined, their obligations, the obligations of host countries, refugee rights expounded, and all this thing. So you have this issue of forced displacement, you have legal frameworks for modern refugees, you have refugee protections, and this will include access to basic human rights, like safety from harm, the possibility of seeking asylum in other countries that welcome that. A fourth thing, thinking about asylum, is asylum seekers, right? Because many refugees will actually take advantage of that. They will seek asylum in countries that have specific now, asylum being a very specific legal term, right? But they'll seek asylum in countries that have processes and institutions for assessing their claims and providing protection, right? And then a fifth thing that I'd have us think about is, we've all seen this on the news, refugee camps, right? In many cases, refugees, they go and find shelter in these designated refugee camps, and they receive direct assistance or even indirect assistance from humanitarian organizations. And then 6, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the lack of voluntary return. Now, sometimes refugees will go back home, but they often usually can't out of safety reasons. There'll be ongoing conflict, ongoing persecution. A lot of times they don't want to, and a lot of times they don't have the means to. So let's think about these 6 things now in relation to the story of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, and ask, do they fit the bill of forced displacement? Well, in a way, right? Joseph, Mary, and Jesus left Bethlehem for Egypt in response to a very specific individual, King Herod, right? So they were facing significant danger, but their displacement wasn't the result of like a generalized persecution or a war or a battle or a coup or an uprising going on with the government, like we see with modern refugees. So that doesn't exist in the story of Jesus. It just doesn't. The second is, this concept of a legal framework. Well, they didn't have the idea of international refugee law in the first century. So that also doesn't apply to Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. There were no established legal protections, international conventions that would sort of govern their status as people fleeing from one locale to another. That's what they were. They were fleeing, people fleeing, right? The third thing is that their journey to a foreign land, to Egypt, was, if you think about like protection, like guided by God, essentially. Like it was his divine guidance, and they weren't relying on protections associated with NGOs or government status or international treaties or anything like that. So they didn't have that sort of protection that modern refugees have. Thinking about asylum seekers, they didn't seek asylum in Egypt through a formalized process like modern asylum seekers would, right? They get to where they're going, the refugees get to where they're going, and once they're there, they can begin to seek out avenues for asylum in other countries. They didn't do that. The process didn't even exist. Their journey, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, was motivated by the biblical narrative and their understanding of God's guidance, the angel of the Lord speaking to them, and so on. 5th, refugee camps. No, they didn't stay in refugee camps. There weren't humanitarian organizations that set refugee camps up for assistance, their sustenance, their safety, as the story would have us believe, is provided by divine intervention, by the hand of God. And then 6th, a lack of voluntary return is something we see with refugees today. Well, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus eventually do return, and they return to Israel voluntarily. They returned to the Galilee voluntarily, Palestine voluntarily, once they knew it was safe to do so, when Archelaus was reigning. And so all 6 of these main points, these 6 marks of a modern refugee, 0 of them fit the bill of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. So it's completely historically anachronistic. It's politically motivated and politically anachronistic to describe the Holy Family in terms of refugees. It's biblically wrong, theologically wrong, socially wrong, politically wrong, historically wrong. It's wrong on every single level. It's an error, right? It's historical anachronism. And that's the big fallacy. We have a fallacy of equivocation going on here, but then historical anachronism is the big one going on here. We're forcing modern standards back on an ancient story. It's just stupidity and ignorance that drives this. Sometimes willing stupidity and ignorance. And so, yeah, I want to, I hope that's helpful. I believe that, it's important to know these things. And yeah, I will stop there, and I'll say I hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glosahouse.com today. Glosa House, language resources for the global community.